Hey folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. Now this is another Synth Pals Virtual Pub episode, and if my timekeeping and record keeping is correct, I believe it is the fourth one. And we've got a full house today, which is amazing. I think this is the first full house, which is incredible. Now we've got more people on today, so we've got one or two topics that we're going to go through, and we'll see how we get on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read out who's joined us today. So I've got Thalrex, who's joining us.
Cheers.
There we go. We've got Totta.
Hello.
Die Miami Die.
Hello.
Neon Highway.
Hi, guys.
Typherion.
Yep.
And Aisle 9.
Hello.
There we go. So we've got some new and some old. At the moment, Neon Highway and Aisle 9
Talk about me, like
are on a roll for 4-0, I think it is, in terms of attendance, which is good going. I know the last episode we did, it was just the three of us.
more than I got at school.
So the topic of today's episode is something that I've been chewing through, and it's discussions I've had with other artists as well in other podcast episodes. And it's songwriting and how you go about actually starting a song. Before we go into the actual production phase and the mix and the mastering, it's all about how you actually come up with a song. And it's something that I've been toying with lately because my prolificness and my output is quite slow, for want of a better way of putting it. And I've been trying to figure out a way of getting more prolific, put the teeth back in, but without at the detriment of quality. So one thing I've been doing is I've been limiting myself in terms of the plugins I use. So I've got a sound palette of plugins, so I'm limiting those. And then I've moved away, or trying to move away from the mouse input of notes, in particular with drum programming. So I'm moving back over to trigger pads and keys as well, and not getting bogged down into samples and sample packs and the sounds I'm using, and coming back to that at the end. And I'm finding it's working a lot better for me. And one other thing that I'm doing in particular as well is using starting out with chords. Now, I did something this week that I've never done before when it comes to production, and I'm not because it's bad, but it's just something I've never done. And that is used a MIDI sequence of chords that pre-exists, and then going in and then changing it to my own liking. And I'm finding it quite liberating, and it works quite well for me, and it's something I'm going to pursue. So that's sort of where I'm at the moment. So what I'd like to hear from, and I think it'll be good for the audience as well, is we've got sort of 7 individuals here, and find out sort of how you all start your music. So in a nutshell, what I now do is I have my limited samples, my sample pack, and then I'll start out with a chord progression, and then I'll build it from there. And I don't get bogged down into the actual sounds that I'm using until it comes to the mixing phase. So with that in mind, let's go around. So Totta, how would you go about starting the actual songwriting process?
Well, I guess I come from primarily 3 different entry points. I'll either go for a beat that I come up with in my head that I want to try building out. I was going to replicate what I mean, but I figured I'd blush my tits off if I tried. But very recently, I just had this idea that I wanted to do a that kind of swing type beat, very 80s vibey.
That reminds me of a Michael Jackson track. Which track is
right.
that?
Yeah.
The Way You Wake Me Feel. The Way You Make Me
That's
Feel.
it.
Yeah, and I feel like beats
Great
like
track.
that, they're just not really... The beat itself is such a good fucking swing, and just laying down that beat with really simple, again, using simple plugins that I had, nothing fancy, default stuff even, just to get the beat out there, and then working from that rhythm. It made me play my keys very differently, the way I placed the chords. So that's one input. The second is just very lyrical. If I have a certain word that is like filled with a feeling. I had the word darling that I just thought, oh, that's such a old, over-the-top romantic thing to even say, darling. And I just built this romantic song out of that turned into a duet. And the last one is, well, just because I'm a piano player, sitting and noodling in front of the piano, basically. Those are my 3 entry points. And not being afraid to try things out. I think generally inspiration can kind of come from anywhere. That's probably the blandest thing anyone's ever fucking said, but it can. And to not judge yourself too harshly. If you find yourself listening to a song in a movie and being like, oh, I really like the way this guitar melody went up here, I want to try to isolate that and make something of my own out of it. Like latching on to ideas as soon as they come, basically, is what I try to do. But
Yeah.
generally it tends to be drums, piano, or a lyric that
Yeah.
guides me.
With regard to that drum beat, that Michael Jackson drum beat, how are you creating that? Are you manufacturing that, or are you actually playing it? Because that's quite a laid back beat, isn't it? And
Yeah,
it
I
quite
wish I could
challenging
play.
to
I mean,
do?
I have a drum kit and all, and I am a drummer, but I don't know how to record drums because I'm not a great producer. So I'm sat on my MIDI keys pretending
Yeah.
to play, going doom dooch doo doo doom dooch doo doo
It's a
doo to
great
get
beat.
the. Yeah, it really is. It's so simple as well to make it sound really fucking tight
Yeah.
and groovy. But I really do like to. I want the onslaught. I want the difference of how hard I hit the note. What is that?
Velocity.
Yes, thank you.
Velocity.
I need the velocity as a drummer. If I don't have velocity input, it just sounds stale, which sometimes technically I want if I want it to sound really electronic. But yeah, usually I try to do manual input to get the velocity changes.
Yeah. Yeah, velocity is key when it comes to drums, isn't it? Yeah, I think.
Truly.
Can you pick it out quite easily then when someone's got the velocity wrong? If they've like put they've sort of like drawn in the notes themselves, and then can you is that easy to, because I'm not a drummer. As a drummer, can you pick out when that velocity's been manufactured?
I mean, maybe if I listened for it, I think it just generally gives the song a very electronic sound. If it doesn't have a change in velocity, so it's definitely when it comes down to toms,
Yeah.
building a beat like doom dooch doo doo doom dooch doo doo doom. Not only having the kick pulling that, but having toms laid over that double that beat and that have a different velocity, pointing out the lead beat. So to speak, it makes all the difference in not just making it sound too intense. To give it breathing room, you need some of the notes to be lower velocity so they don't all dominate. Basically.
Yeah, fantastic, lovely stuff. Sorry, I was just got distracted then. On Die Miami Die, on your image there, there's like a warning triangle, and I don't know what that means. How odd. Oh. Anyway, yeah, I got a bit distracted. Yeah, thanks, Totta. Yeah, brilliant stuff. I really want to hear that drum beat as well, because I love Michael Jackson. I love that. That's off the Bad album as well, isn't it? The Way You Make Me Feel. I'm sure it is on the Bad album. And it's a great drum beat. So I'm intrigued to see how that materializes. So then moving around. So with regards to starting songs, let's go. Thalrex, how did your songs start?
Well, there's a method to everything, but I kind of work a bit schizophrenic,
Yeah.
if you could say. So usually how I start out is I lay down a bass line, and then I start finding the chords to that bass line and just working from there, really. In my case, it's like I have never really learned any advanced music theory, so for me it's all about using my ears and just figuring out what I find sounds correct
Yeah.
or good. Yeah, drums, chords, and then bass chords, and then I build a beat around it. Usually, all my tracks starts out like kind of like a 16-beat. 16-bar loop, and I have some projects that have been stuck like loops for like half a year, and then then maybe I sometimes later I come back to the loop, and I just sit down one night and create a full track from that loop. But very often I just end up with small loops, and that's all I manage for that session, really.
Yeah. How do you get? So I'll put this out to the group now. So you say you got a bank of loops that you've had for 6 months, half a year. how do you then get those from loops to a full song? Does anyone have like a secret? I say secret. It won't be a secret anymore because you're going to reveal it. Does anyone have a workflow that they have to get a loop to a full song?
I just keep adding random amounts of stuff to it until I, almost just like literally will add new ideas, kind of keep building sometimes new ideas on top of that 16-bar loop, and then start spreading it all out. And you've got way too much. You've got way too many ideas, but only a few of them may be what you're going to really need. But like, you then sort of spread it out from there all the way through. But I don't always approach it in that way. But I do sometimes. Like, I call them 16-bar masterpieces, like Thalrex, and they just never go further. They just end up literally stuck on that thing, and then you go like, oh, that's another one I've written that's never going to turn into something. But then sometimes, like, it's sort of improvising, I think, a lot, like over the top of that 16 bars. Like, you improvise some percussion, you'll try some different synth sounds or different, like a lead sound or whatever. So you might be muting things and playing something else over the top, because gradually you're sort of paring down what parts work with each other as well. And of course, I mean, that is if it all works over just a 16-bar chord progression, because of course you might want to change the chord progression, so you might write another 16 bars or something next to it. But like, but at some point I've started more and more trying to get out of that fairly quickly into sort of mapping out the whole thing, so I find if I get sort of into the minutiae of drum sounds and everything, which I do, I get really stuck in that if I'm not careful. I'm on a kick drum in week 3, so I try to sort of like, move past like kick and snare by sort of month or something, so I'm just pushing myself to not end up stuck in production sort of mode, where you haven't got any musical substance. So I think if I map it out relatively quickly, in fact get the whole idea out relatively quickly, I find, otherwise I get bored and have to go and make tea.
I kind of like to go like the harmonic route. I try to, if I have a 16-bar loop that I really like, I really try to go away from it and find something that makes it really satisfying to come back into that. Like, which melodic note do I want to end this on in order to want to come back to that 16-bar loop? What makes that satisfying to return to? Like, making my songs, I often think of them as Oreo cookies, and I try to figure out, is it the really juicy, nice, gooey stuff in the middle, or is this my cookie part? And I try to like
analogy.
move on from the cookie to the gooey, and I want each transition to be satisfying. That's probably as well because I always add vocals to my song, that I want it to be like verse or pre-chorus leading into a really satisfying chorus, and then the transition back into that 16-bar loop that most likely is my verse. Then I want that to feel satisfying as well as a listener. So I go really melodic with it. When I have a loop like that, I try to just pull the melody away from it, change up the chord progression, and see if I can find my way back home to that original loop.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of doing it.
That's good advice, yeah.
Go on, Tim.
Can I ask something, Mark, off of that? Which is, because Totta, you're saying you your stuff is song-based often, so you're going to put vocals on it, and I'm a bit half and half. Sometimes I'm putting vocals on things, sometimes I'm not. But like, if you're not putting vocals, you're not doing things necessarily in a song format. What format do people find that they use? Are they using are they thinking this is the verse, this is the chorus, this is the middle eight or the bridge or whatever you want to call it? Are you thinking that way to sort of build your song up? Or do you not think that way at all? Do you think in a different sort of set of forms? Do you think A, B, do you think in themes, or do you just like think in a linear sort of way that every sort of, you're constantly moving in sort of 8-bar patterns or 16-bar patterns? How do you think of the structure of your piece of music, which is quite an interesting sort of thing, particularly in electronic music, which can be quite formulaic? So, interested what other people do.
I mean, personally, when I set up
like Die Miami Die, you never do. Die Miami
you listen
Die.
to my
You never do
music, most of it-
straightforward structures, do you?
No, I mean it's all over the place, and for me, it's just more of what's the flow, like what am I feeling as I'm composing it. If you listen to a fair bit of some of my recent stuff, I really am a big fan of wide chord progressions that kind of almost symphonic in a way, and I always like to add those in as a nice little break. But if you listen, there's no some songs have like a bit more structure to them, but other ones that just say, I let the song become the song. There are so many times where I've been inspired by a song and I'm like, okay, well, I want to try to capture this sound, and it always turns into something good that's not anywhere close to what I was originally going for. So I would say, for me anyway, I just let the song become what it's supposed to be. Like, where's the flow going? What cool sound am I getting? And that's another reason why my music varies so much too in tone, is because I just let it become what it is, and say, screw it, just put it out there and see what happens with it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. That's kind of how I approach my songwriting as well.
Yeah.
But generally what I try to do is I have like, in my mind, I have like a hook that I want to have consistent throughout the song. But my songwriting is generally, like, I'm influenced by a lot of progressive metal, so it's constantly changing. And so there's always like, there's always a little bit of chaos going just throughout the music. And so, but what I try to continue maintaining is that hook. And that can be difficult. So sometimes I'll like reintroduce it with like a counter melody, or like I'll reintroduce it with a different synth, and then I'll maybe slow it down. I'll add reverb to it. I'll distort it. Just whatever I can to continue keeping the hook, but also keep it fresh. I don't know. It's something that I realized when I write music is like, I have like this songwriting ADD where I can't have two things repeat. So I'm like, oh man, this is boring. This is gonna be boring. So then I just change it up again. And then when I listen to it back, I'm like, wow, this is so like all over the place. This is who mentioned schizophrenic, like or something like that. Yeah, like that's kind of how I end up hearing my music sometimes. That's something I'm trying to work on. But
yeah, I do the same thing. I'll throw in just random percussion because I'm like, oh, this can't. It sounds boring just going, for say 4 bars with a chord progression, like say a synth lead. Like all right, let me add in some percussion. I think that maximalist kind of take sometimes it isn't the best. I think we analyze our own music too harshly, and we're like, oh, this is boring. But again, the reason why it might sound boring to us is because we're listening to it for how many times? Hundreds of times, and it's gonna start sounding a little dull. But to people who are listening the first, second, third, fourth time, like it's gonna sound fresh and it's gonna be fine. And I find myself trying to remove things a lot more often now than I would have even a year ago.
Yeah,
I think
Go on, Mark.
I think sort of the sort of Western kind of music we're all sort of conditioned into this verse, chorus, verse, middle eight kind of stuff, and I think I agree with Die Miami Die. I think if you can find something more interesting just by developing the track, it's not always how I work, but it's certainly something I would aspire to. I listen to bands like Underworld who can do an 11-minute track that is 2 chords, and you're like, how are they maintaining my interest for 11 minutes on 2 chords? And it's because they're not showcasing the lead synth or the pads or anything else. What they're showcasing is the percussion that's running underneath, or the bass line that's changing, the stuff that typically we don't go for. We kind of, again, in Western music, we kind of go, we want the bass and the drum to be doing their thing, doing the rhythm section, and we'll build upon that instead of thinking, let the pads and the chords just continue to repeat as if they were the bass and the drum, and let the percussion be the ones that evolve. And like you said, Die Miami Die, putting extra things in there. I like to put a lot of nuances into tracks I'm doing, kind of not your typical kind of whooshies, but kind of big sort of drum beats that happen once in the tune, or a little kind of servo motor in there, something kind of from listening to industrial music in the 90s, little servo motors, things like that. Just anything that will kind of surprise you, I think, when you're building that track.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and it's something I do in tracks as well. Going back to what Tim's original question was, I think I take it from a slightly different viewpoint, and whereby I think it's because I'm very pragmatic with my approach to things. In that I think, right, I've got a loop, and then I'll start mapping out the sections that I want. And then I think in Logic, the insert silence between locators is probably my most used tool, purely because I then start moving those things around. I have it set and I'm like, oh, I need space there, and then I'll cut space there. So I think, but going back to what Die Miami Die said and Typherion as well, I think, but there are elements of that in there too. And I think with Typherion's one in particular, I think the reason I can see why you like prog now in that because if you're writing songs where you're having nothing repeats, that's very proggy. I'm a metalhead myself. I know some prog metal, but not a massive amount. But I can see where you're coming from with that. So my question to you, Carl, then is how do you start? So you got an idea? How does that song start then?
Typically, I don't have an idea, so it kind of a number of different ways, and similar to Totta, piano is my instrument that I love going to. I've got a piano in the house, and I'll occasionally, I would say about a third of the output that I've done, I'll sit at a piano, and I like that for figuring out nice chord sequences because they sound beautiful on a piano, and then I've done that where I've taken a chord sequence upstairs, put it onto a laptop, keyed it in, and it's then become like a kind of 80s, early 90s goth sounding track. And then I'll just take the instrumentation and switch it from a traditional bass or a kit or something into something more electronic, put some delay on it, and suddenly it's become this serene, beautiful piano track that's evolved through a late 80s goth track and ends up as this electro piece. And I think in terms of sort of building it from the start, I'm not particularly great with percussion, so I'm sort of keying it in sort of 1-3, 1-3, like Tim was saying, which is quite boring. My rhythm's not great, but once I've keyed it in and I've built stuff over that, then I'll go in and I'll just, on the piano roll, just kind of move it back a beat, move it forward a beat, start inserting other beats, and sort of build the complexity from there. So it's almost like, it's like having a black and white sketch. It's like having a sketch in front of you, and gradually that is being coloured in until you've got the full track, which ends up this like massive colour painting, which you want it to be.
Yeah, I like that idea. The sketch pad. I think I've said that on many episodes of the podcast, the idea of having a sketch pad and trying not to get bogged down with the actual sounds and just getting the ideas down. And chatting to Michael just now, and the other interview I had earlier today with another gent called Simon in the safety word, and they said the exact same thing. It's just to get the ideas down. Don't get bogged down.
Yeah.
And off the back of that, though, one key question they come up with, or I think this was Simon with the safety word, said that he said regardless of whether or not he actually likes the song, he'll continue to the end and write the whole song. So I've been intrigued to know if everyone else or anyone else follows, or everyone does follow that similar pathway, because I know I fall foul of this. I'll get halfway through and I'll listen and be like, I don't like that, and then I'll kick it to the curb rather than actually take it all the way to the end. I'll come back. Obviously, I'll come back to the how you start a song with everyone else, but does everyone else, once they start a song, are they like, you know what, I'm going to finish this, I'm going to take it and see it through to the end?
Not at all.
No.
Yeah, I have the number of like files I have on my hard drive that I just need to clear. It's just, yeah, and I open up an old project. I'm like, why would I write this? Like, the creative process is such a nightmare because I like in the moment I like it, and then I'll revisit it. And I'm like, oh god, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
I think I'm a firm believer. Now, I'm guilty of this as well. I have literally hundreds of ideas and concepts and half tracks and quarter tracks. I'm a firm believer, though, that if you sit there long enough, you will always work it out.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you got. Like, do you have something that's good? Yeah. Is it mediocre? Yeah. If I work it, maybe I can get something better or finish it. But we all have, limited time. Yeah. Right, like there's so many other things that we have to do as artists, like try to promote, or I do my own album artwork too and everything. So you only have a certain amount of time, and if it's a decent idea, that's fine. You can work it to the end, but wouldn't you want to put that into something that sounds a little bit better? And those are usually the ones that tend to become tracks, or the ones that kind of favor a better direction and are worth putting the work into.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on, yeah.
I was just going to say briefly, does everybody remember all those ideas? Like, you've got those banks of ideas in your hard drive? Because I know that I can think back and go, I wrote a track 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and actually one bar of that bass line would be great, and I can go back, copy it, and just paste it into the new track and go, that's exactly what I wanted there. Yeah. So do you guys remember all those failed projects, and do they come back to you then?
Sometimes. Well, actually, sometimes when I get stuck in a small loop and I kind of abandon the project, sometimes later when I go over my project files and listening to what I have, I can get surprised. Like my EP that I released in January, the title track "Memories" from that EP was kind of an accidental track because it was one of the loops that I had made it over a year ago and kind of just abandoned it. And then I sat down one night and figured out I like the chord progression, so let's just make this track work.
Yeah.
I kind of do the same. I try to hang on to any old ideas, because what I was going to say to the question earlier is nowadays I try not to force them all into becoming songs. I figure I have ideas that sometimes would suit. They're meant to be just instrumentals. They're not meant to have vocals, and I keep trying to fucking put vocals on a track that I don't want vocals on for no reason. I'm like, oh, just make this an instrumental track instead and let it be that. Or the other way, I've done vocal only tracks, a cappella songs that I put as little interludes because I just wanted the voice. I wanted nothing else, and being more free with that and not trying to force, I feel like I'm making music only for my own sake anyway, right? And if nobody's going to listen to it anyway, I might as well do what I want to do. So, I try to force it into some sort of mainstream structure if it's only in my own head for my universe. So I try to let things, I try to dive into the cinematic aspect and ask myself like, oh, could I turn this into like a cool interlude sequence? What is playing in my mind when I hear this, and why doesn't it want to be a song? And then isolate that and let it be something different than a song, and I still get to release it, I still get to put it out into the world, but it just doesn't need to become a song.
Yeah, that's a really good mentality to have, I think, and thinking that actually it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-blown song. It could be something totally different. And I've done something similar. It's probably something I used to do a while back when I was more into sort of scoring stuff, or not because I did it, I just did it for fun, like scoring stuff and then releasing my interpretations of like famous scenes and stuff. And I know I picked up again earlier, well, probably a few months ago, but time got away from me again. But no, I think it's great if you can have that vision of where actually this isn't going to be a full song, but I can do this with it instead, and which is fantastic. So going on to starting a song, let's go with Typherion. So you mentioned your songs generally don't have, or you try not to repeat the same thing. How does that start with you?
So I guess I'm a guitar player first and foremost. Actually, I don't know why I'm going to say first and foremost. I don't know how to play anything else. I actually don't know how to play keys. So yeah. what I generally do is I write some guitar riffs and then I painfully transcribe them into MIDI, and that becomes my synth line. And so my guitar riffs are generally pretty progressive, and so that's where I start. And then from there, I'll try to, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, like I want to transport the listener somewhere. Like any kind of creative medium, I always view it as a form of escapism. So like, especially with synthwave, it's very easy to do that. So what I try to do is, okay, like, what's the vibe? Is there any kind of piece of fiction that I'm inspired by to like transport this listener to? So I start adding chordal layers. I start using I use a lot of like impacts, a lot of like just slams to like transition and stuff like that. Those are fun to use. I have a whole library of just like very industrial sounds of like metallic hits, and that's just for me it's like such a cheap way to like just transition to the next part, because it's so sudden, and the listener immediately like cues in, okay, this is something new. I also use a lot of like low pass or automated filters to build tension. But yeah, generally It starts with the guitar. I write, and the guitar is basically like, I guess one thing that I didn't realize coming into the synthwave space is people call ARPs, like any kind of synth line is an ARP. I didn't realize that because like as a guitar player, I know what an arpeggio is, right? It's like it's just the individual notes of a chord, right? But I didn't realize that, oh, I'm writing, all my riffs are ARPs. So that's where it starts, and then I'll add like chordal layers in the background, like a pad, and then I'll work on the percussion. And eventually, hopefully, it leads me to like something amazing, but I don't know. Sometimes I'm just lost because I'm all my writing is so chaotic, so I don't know. And also it takes me like so long to finish a song.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you on the impacts as well. I use impacts a lot in songs, and specifically with transitions.
They're great.
I love using impacts. Do you create, or does anyone create their own impacts from like just hitting shit? Not literally.
I've been thinking about that. There's a construction site near me, and I was like, I need to sample this. Like, I need to just like pull out my phone and just like record this literally, because I'd love to do that actually.
Because I thought about doing it.
Well, it depends on the type of impact. Like, I'm more used to EDM style impacts, bass, white noise, and whatever else. But yeah, I created one time. It took, I don't know, 20 minutes. But it was kind of a pain in the ass. I could have just gone on to Splice and gotten an impact there. But it was interesting to kind of feel it out. And, I score music professionally as well. And I remember a few years ago I was working on something, and they wanted like a Hans Zimmer, like a wah kind of thing, and that took some time too. It's not technically an impact, I don't think, but just realize like it's kind of crazy to try to layer certain sounds to get what you want it to sound like, and it's interesting, but it just seems like ultimately a waste of time. Nobody but probably us are gonna be like, oh wow, you designed that impact, cool. No one else is gonna know, so I feel like again, with limited time, just easier to pull in a sample if you can. But I definitely think everyone should do it, because I think it's going to teach you more about the production process.
No, I agree with you there, and it reminds me of a story of I had where I wanted to create a sound, and it was the sound of stabbing a pig. And this was for a Foley sound design. So I had a melon, and I went to stab the melon. Instead of stabbing the melon, I stabbed my hand. So I just went bang into my hand, and all you can hear is me swearing into the microphone. And I used the sound of the knife going into my hand on the final piece as well. I think it's on the internet somewhere. I wonder if it's still on it might still be on my YouTube channel. It's I did a recreation of the scene from Apocalyptica, whether it's if you've seen it, there's an opening chase scene, and then the pig gets impaled, and that pig getting impaled is when I've recreated it, is my hand getting stabbed instead of a watermelon. But yeah, a nice bit of information for you there.
I don't go harming animals in my tracks, or myself generally. If I can help it. But I'm just not as professional, I don't think. But what I do is like sort of. I like grabbing sort of sounds and creating sort of, you say impacts, but maybe more like risers and things, by reversing things, by like doing a lot of like sort of manipulation of sound. Like, so I might not have made the original sound, or I might play a pad, or I might actually sample the entire track. Like, sort of, I do that quite a lot. Like, sort of, which is a great thing to do, is sort of actually use your own track as like and spin it all backwards, or do something with it, and like that kind of thing. So like or slow it all down weirdly, or that kind of thing. So I really like I do use sound design, but I do sort of agree with Miami Dye that as I'm doing it and spending hours creating this whoosh, or whatever, I'm sitting there going, no one fucking cares, do they? They're not going to do this, and then go, fantastic, what a great riser that was. So, I am aware that you have.
You need a song that's just a riser. Just a song with risers. That's it.
That's, you know what? Hans Zimmer did that in The Dark Knight, right? Isn't that electronic cello? It's just essentially a riser. It's a pitch riser.
Yeah.
I think, right? It does. I don't think it I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I don't know if it crescendos to anything. I think it just is what it is, but he used a really long riser essentially.
I actually have a little technique that I use sometimes in my productions, where I take one of my synths and add a really big reverb with a long tail, and then I record this, reverse it, and I use that reversed reverb as a kind of a riser before.
Yeah.
I think that's
Long
that's
reverb's wonderful for
sometimes
that.
that work.
It's like you were saying, Tim, reverse. Like, I love a reverse piano. A reverse piano is a great way of kind of building right up, you know.
Yeah,
And
it sounds really cool.
Speaking for the
Anything that
musicians who suck at production. No, sorry.
That's right.
I was just gonna say I'm one of those. I'm not a great producer, but I know how I want it to sound, and I have an audio engineer, so I'm the kind of person who records and goes, "Can you do something that goes like right for this part?" And I need the to be fucking tight on exactly the like. I know how I want it, but I don't know how to make it. So splice generally, if I want to put it in myself,
pain, Mark
that's
can
where
make
I
it
look
for
to.
There's a quick little plug for me. I do the same though. When you mentioned there about making sounds, I'll be sat there like writing or composing or something, and then I'll just voice it. I'll be like, oh, this bit here needs like a da-dung, or it needs a or something like that, and then I'll try and recreate it as best I can. Yeah, all that. Yeah, exactly. But going back to what Tim said earlier about actually taking your song, taking your song and then like manipulating it in your own track. It kind of reminds me of there's a bit of trivia for you here. The Kit Kat analogy of that the actual chocolate used by Kit Kat features an actual Kit Kat in it. So they recycle Kit Kat into the Kit Kat chocolate, and it's a hit. So there you go. If you didn't know that already, you do now. I can't remember where I got that from.
I always loved Brian Eno's thing of like, he has this sort of some weird recording he's done of insects from South America or something, which he just puts into recording. So the whole thing will be there, and everyone will be going, oh yeah, it's really great, but what's wrong? And he'll go like, yeah, it's missing something, and he just puts this in at a subliminal, really low level into the track, and everyone goes like, yeah, and he says, no, it's great now. And he just like puts it in, but you can't really hear it. But it's just like it's got Brian Eno's insects in the background somewhere, and it's great. And he's the kind of person who can wander in and suggest doing this, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's a great idea, Brian. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, you two's album would have never been as good had you not put insects all over it." But like, you know, so it's weird. He's got this idea. If you've never read his index of, I think it's a sort of autobiography, sort of like of his, which is
appendices and other. Something.
Yes,
yeah,
and something. Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah,
it's
good.
It's a really good book of all his very odd producery ideas, most of which the rest of us would never get away with if we were working with someone else. But they are interesting. It's that thing of just throwing. Actually, it sounds crazy, but it's just throwing the process out. It's just making the thing not boring, not predictable, just coming up with something a little bit creative. And I think you can do that just in your own writing, in your own day-to-day sort of stuff, by going like, oh, maybe I do it this way all the time, but like, you know what, I'm just gonna mix it up and do something a different way than I would normally. I'm gonna reverse that vocal. I'm gonna, you know, start at the end of the track.
You've got so much in front of you as well, and
yeah.
And I think, Mark, we talked about it before when we were talking about Isotope, or love of Isotope and vocal synth, and you were like, have you put it on anything else? And I was like, oh, I haven't done that yet. You're like, try putting it on some drums. I was like, that's a great idea. You know, just like, I'm sure Kraftwerk put vocoders on some of their drums back in the 70s, but you just forget that, do you know what, we could really easily just apply something that's not meant to go on to that. You know, mix it up.
Yeah, it reminds
How many
me of
people
the story
use samplers? Sorry.
I was gonna say I use this. I do use a sampler. I don't use them extensively, to be fair. But what I was gonna say is in response to Carl, was it reminds me of the story of how I can't remember what artist it was. I was in Hans' studio, and they were describing how they would record a vocal and send it out through a guitar cab and record it with an SM57, and then capture the room reverb. And I can't remember which band it was. It might have well have been Depeche Mode, or it was Bowie. Can't remember which one. But no, it goes back to what Carl was saying of like how just doing something different. And obviously, I think they had more time and more money to spend in the studio. But no, Tim, what was your question?
I've forgotten now. Just sampler. Yeah, it's like when you're recording, like I've just started doing it more, and it's very. I mean, Typherion would know because obviously we use the same DAW, which is better than all of yours. Cubase. And door walls. Yeah,
I agree.
Started. And no, basically, so what you can do is you've got this. There's a very basic sampler that, like, you can just create a sample track, just like an instrument track, and then on that you get your keyboard down the bottom on your sampler track, and you can literally just drag anything off of your arrange window and just drop it onto a key, and then it's automatically sort of spread across the keyboard. And I mean, I did come from the days of hardware sampling. I mean, that's what I used to do, was like sit with an Akai S3000, like sampling religiously things into my Akai to make a drum kit, to make which took forever to do stuff. And yet it was the only way of making a lot of sounds. There was no other way of making them. And then you had to save them all out to discs and load them all off discs if the disc didn't break, and it took forever. So I got to the point where the whole thought of sampling, when you could get digital audio, which is all just movable about on your screen, I just hated sampling. And I was like, why would I bother sampling again? But of course, it's so creative. You just grab a vocal, you chuck it onto a key, you start playing the vocal across the keyboard, and suddenly you change the loop point on the vocal, you put a filter on it, and before you know it, you've made an instrument, a totally new sounding sort of thing to play around with, which, yes, there are probably versions similar somewhere if you look through all your billions of sounds in your plugins, but, like, you know, I think it's that thing of just, like, you know, being quite sort of creative with your own stuff that you're busy writing. You write something and then you go, oh, I'll just chop that up, and then I'll drop that little bit in, and then I'll, you know, create a rhythm with that, and I've got a percussive sound to use, and that percussive sound came from my vocal, or came from, you know, Mark stabbing his hand. You know, it's all quite easy to do.
Isn't Ableton's workflow basically sampling? I don't use, we both use Cubase, but isn't Ableton mainly a sampler type DAW? Just out of curiosity.
I wouldn't know.
Okay, nobody uses Ableton here. That's hilarious, because like I thought everyone used Ableton apart from me and Isle 9.
What do you use, Miami DAW?
I use FL Studio. I've used it.
Hey.
I was. I'm going to date myself here, but I was 16, so 21 years ago. This guy showed me this thing called Fruity Loops, and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool." And I think it was maybe a couple of years later that I downloaded it illegally, and then I'd say I think 2011 I actually bought the program. I started buying my stuff, right? Like a real producer buys their stuff; they don't rip it like Steve Aoki or anyone else. I don't know if you guys remember that one. That's forever ago. He got busted for using like a cracked version of Silent or something like that. But I want to say I'm loyal to it. I think there's a lot of great stuff, but Ableton has some great stuff too. Apparently, like you can quantize audio as you're recording. So there's give and take for some things. I don't believe you can do it with FL. You might be able to, but they all have like. I feel like it's more of a preference thing. Like they can all essentially do basically the same thing, and then from there it just kind of goes with I think your workflow you like better. But like I said, I'm just used to FL. I'm too lazy to learn anything else, so I guess I'm stuck with it.
I actually tried to learn Logic a couple of years ago, but I just can't get used to anything else than the piano roll in FL Studio. It's so easy to work with if you know how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's I obviously doing the podcast and interviewing various artists and stuff to see a pattern of what people use, and factor that hugely. Obviously, it's used by a vast array of individuals, and you can use it as a door in every. I was chatting to the used Ableton, and he was saying that he moved over from just Reason. Are there any Reason users? Has anyone got any experience?
Well,
that
I tried. I tried to.
You were saying that.
Sorry,
I've
go ahead.
used it before, but like, sorry. I've used it before, but not sort of like with much success myself. But like years ago, I used it when it first came out. But I was just talking to his name's gone out of my head now, Mike. Who you've got an interview on the podcast with him coming up.
Oakley.
You've just yeah.
That's what I was chatting to just now. Yeah,
and he's
Mark, your video drop.
He uses Reason, doesn't he? Yeah, he's really a big Reason user, which
he did.
Had been that really got him into doing it. Anyway, I don't know if he still uses it exclusively, but yeah,
he spoiler. He did the whole of the California album using Reason, and then he moved over to Ableton. Yeah. I've used Reason 5, and I really like being able to see the back and the routing and everything, and the actual synths that came with it was really, really good. But then I moved to Logic, and then I went, and then I stopped actually recording, so I then went back to Logic. But I do like Ableton. I've toyed with Ableton a little bit. I created a synth. No, it wasn't. It was I used Max a reverb plugin, and then I could. It was all very convoluted. I had a big whale on screen that reacted to performance. But no, I'd love to use like Miami Die. I think it was, or it might be Thalrex said it'd be like getting and using another. It's kind of time, isn't it? Like why fix what isn't. But any Reaper users in the house? Anyone use Reaper? Tumbleweed.
I've used Reaper. Yeah. I think I started on Reaper actually, because it was such a guitarist-friendly DAW. It was just very easy to all the hotkeys were very easy when I had my guitar in front of me and I was recording. And it was also cheap. I think I paid like $60 for it or something like that.
Still
Canadian
got the evaluation license. I've had it for about it come after to me because I've had it for about 6 years. Evaluation license. Right, it's about 60. I think it's 60 quid over here. I think it's probably getting towards an hour now. I told you one topic off on tangents, and I know we haven't heard from Arnaud though I'm out of songs. So I think we're just I know it's crazy stuff. Tim, as you mentioned then, do you want to just mention how to begin in the world of IL9?
I think it's not dissimilar from Thalrex and Totta in many ways. I think I do tend to start often from a beat. I will often get a groove going of some description. I just find that I sort of connect with it better if I've got a groove. But not in. Sometimes it's like, the song I've just got out at the moment, Plug the Gates, like the one that I've just got out at the moment, that was a piano kind of a thing, and it's kind of quite obvious the whole track starts with this little piano thing, and that was where that came from, and so the groove came after that, I think. But so it's not exclusive, but it is often, because doing electronic things, synthwave and that kind of stuff, it will often be more like a 8-bar or a 16-bar sort of thing, and then I sort of extrapolate that and sort of, once I've got like a whole load of different parts, start to break them down and kind of get a structure going, and then sort of flesh it out, or in fact often take away and sort of work out what doesn't work and what I don't need. But like, I do try at the same time. A lot of my tracks are sort of like, it's like, well, it's funny. It's like Miami Nights that I wrote, which is kind of literally a 2-chord sort of piece. I don't think there's anything complex going on in that. And whereas the one that I've just released has got a lot more changes on the chords. But like, a lot of the time I sort of do find that it's more about sort of having groove and feel and melody than necessarily a very complex sort of harmonic construction underneath it. And I do get very into sounds. I'm just very sort of hooked into sounds. But again, it might be something like where the bass moves relative to the chords, you know, just some really interesting movement on the bass that makes that simple chord progression really good from, you know, sort of one verse to a chorus or something. Or it might be the fact that you change to an octave type movement on the bass or something in the chords. So it's often sort of subtle things that are changing, not huge ones, to sort of kick something up from one part to another or whatever. But like, yeah, I do get very, very locked into sort of just like how sounds work together in the mix. I do tend to be working on the mix almost from the word go, but I have to try and stop myself from getting too bogged down in that, because exactly like you said, Mark, I can just end up locked into that in my sort of producery brain and like really upset with you know, that bass isn't sitting well with the kick drum, and like you haven't got a tune though. I mean, what's the point of getting that sounding great if you don't have a song? So, you know, I do have to try and get out of that, and so that's my biggest stumbling block. I mean, you say like sort of sometimes not as prolific as you'd like to be, and I think that's sometimes what I get locked into. Yeah.
I think you're right. I'm trying different tools and tactics now to stop myself. I think when it, like, much like you said with mixing, I cannot help but I think, I quickly while I'm here, and I'll be like, that doesn't sound right now, and then I need to move away from doing that as well. That was what do you mix as you go along? So you are mixing. Yeah, this is now of actual production. Do you actually mix into if you have a compressor or what is it, the Waves SSL console? Do you mix it into that?
Yeah. I mean, years ago.
When else do that? Go on, Tim.
Yeah, years ago, I would have never sort of done that. Sort of have like on my master bus, like, you know, a compressor and a limiter and maybe an EQ or that sort of thing. I just wouldn't have thought of doing that. But then I think I was working out the box. I was working on mixing desks, and you know, it just wasn't an option. I didn't perhaps have that all sitting around to plug, you know, to wire up. So, and then I sort of have a very much, I'll track all of this and then I'll mix it all later kind of mentality. But the more and more I've worked in the box, the more I've just like, we'll have something like that sitting on the end. And like, I think I'm constantly working with my mix versus like the compressor and the limiter. So I'm sort of, you know, mixing into that. But like, you do have to be really careful doing that you don't lose sight of what that's doing and just think it's all fine and then come back and look at the fact that it's applying an enormous amount of compression, and you know, and actually you keep wondering why you can't turn something up, and the reason is that you're banging all the end stops with all the levels. So as long as you're really careful, that can work quite nicely. And then of course you're kind of halfway there, you're kind of very close when you finish writing, and then you're just tweaking things a little bit. But you know, it can be, it has its good and bad sides, but overall, yes, that's what I find. It works better than if I then write a track without that and just slap it all on the end. So I think it helps me.
I follow a similar workflow.
Yeah, not me though.
So I'm Miami Die.
Yeah.
How do you start this song game?
Well, just on the mixing point, so I mix while I'm creating, because I can't stand the elements all might be there, but if they're not sounding good, I can't even stand to listen to them. Like, I got to make this sound at least halfway decent. I will mix while I'm going, and then mix some more, and then I will just open a whole new project, bounce the stems out, and start again to see if I could do better, right? Because I always look at it like, first of all, the processing, it can't handle all the plugins I throw on there. So I'm like, all right, well, let me bounce things out. You know, because I'll use mixed stems in my final mix. I'll start fresh. But yeah, anyway, for starting music, it depends. I mean, there are days where I wake up and I literally will wake up with and have a song I can hear in my head, and I'm like, I don't know where it came from. There's like two that I really love, and I got to figure out, and they're not even synthwave. One of them's like a kind of alternative thing, and another one's kind of like this trance anthem. Anyway, I digress about that. For me, I think genre depends. Like if you're gonna do something more funky, like funkier, I feel like you probably want to get the drums and the bass really working well together. So maybe you want to start with there. And typically a lot of music like that has chords peppered in, or the chords, or like, you know, a Rhodes or something is kind of sitting in the back. Right? It kind of it depends on the genre, like what instruments are typically being highlighted. That's what I would start with. One Near Not, I know Tim likes that one. That one was me doing sound design. So I like to design like 90% of the synths that I use, I create essentially. Like I'll patch them out from whatever plugin I'm using from scratch. However, for that one, I was using a preset and I was just kind of messing around, and I just started hitting some random keys. I was like, oh, that sounds it's a beautiful melody. So I started a completely new project. I got that melody down, and then I revisited it, and that's how the song came about. So sometimes it'll be that. Other times I was trying to One for Good Luck. If you guys listen to that, you'll hear super 80s kind of chord progression in there. That one I was trying to design a sound for another track on like a Fairlight, a CMI plugin. Arturia has a brilliant one, and I was just hitting those two chords, and but when I was making that sound, it didn't fit with the track. But I was like, this would sound brilliant as its own track. So a lot of times I find I write some of my best stuff when I'm actually not even trying to write a song for it. It just kind of comes as an accident, and that's really when I put the best stuff down. But usually it's when I'm trying to design a sound. I'll just play some chords, and that'll just kind of lead somewhere else. So, yeah, sound design's big for me.
Yeah, it's kind of like not forcing it, isn't it? Like if you're not forcing it, then it kind of happens.
Right, yeah, and it happens a lot more when you're not forcing it.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Folks, we're almost coming up to the hour mark now of the 4th Synth Pals Virtual Pub. So, I know, stunned faces. You can see this if you're watching this on YouTube. What we're going to do is, if we'll go around, and this is your opportunity, those who've been on this before, you know what's coming next, where you can just tell the audience, they know who you are now because you've been talking, but where they can find you and your music online. So we'll snake our way around, like some sort of serpent. So Thalrex, where can we find you online?
Yeah, so you can find all my music on Spotify and Bandcamp, SoundCloud. Yeah, I think that's all.
Fantastic, lovely stuff. Totta.
Sorry, yeah. So Totta, you can find my music basically any of the digital streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, TikTok, all of the above. And I primarily use Instagram for my social media if you want to keep tabs on upcoming tracks, like my new Christmas single coming 1st of December.
How did I not ask that? Love it. Brilliant. I can't wait to hear that. And Deezer. It's not often I hear people mention Deezer. Maybe that's because UK-based things.
Only Niza listens to it.
Did you?
No,
Highway.
I just think nobody listens to it.
I thought you said you used to listen to it.
People use it.
No.
Neon Highway, where can we find you?
Yeah, just all the usual places under Neon Highway, Spotify, all the usual platforms, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, and most of the social media stuff goes through Instagram. Just Neon Highway Synth.
Yeah, same spiel. I guess wherever DistroKid is pushing my stuff. So Spotify, Deezer, Tidal, all of the above. I also post most of my like half-baked ideas. I usually post them on Instagram as just these like guitar playthrough montage videos. So you can check those out.
Nice.
I love them. They're all really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
R9.
Yeah, you can find my music under R9 on all the normal streaming platforms. You know, just don't listen to SoundCloud because they don't pay me anything. In fact, basically listen on Apple Music all the time or Tidal. You know, just like not that I ever do, but like they'll pay me more. So no, you can find them absolutely anywhere. And particularly, I'm active on Spotify, I guess. So and then at Isle9 Music on Instagram. I am very probably far too busy, I would be told by my wife, on Instagram. And then TikTok, yes, that I do exist on that as well at the same thing. Yes. And I'm on YouTube and all the rest of it. And Twitter, for some reason, I'm at IL9 Synthwave. So there we go. Yeah, so
lovely.
Find me there. Thank you.
Die Miami Die.
The usual Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp. If you Google Die Miami Die, I don't think you're going to get anything else. So, yeah, just use Google. You'll find me. And, yeah, I'm most active on Instagram and Twitter. And, yeah, that's it.
Fantastic, folks. As always with this, I'll put links in the show notes so the audience can go away. And do go check out everybody who's participated today. Go check out their music. Folks, thanks for joining me on this, the 4th episode. There'll be one more before Christmas for the audience listening, so do look out for that, or rather listen. Look, if you watch. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, look out for that. And folks, thanks for joining me on this, and I'll catch up with you all again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.